This fabric didn't change how my studio sounds. It changed how I feel every time I walk in. And that turned out to matter way more than I expected. So I tore everything apart and rebuilt it to find out how much my environment affects how I create. The original design of these panels was built around the idea of making them as light as I possibly could, but I found that it made them a little bit fragile. So that's what all of this is for. I'm going to do a few things to make these panels a little bit stronger, a little bit more stable, and something that's going to make them look a lot better once I add the new fabric. People ask why I care so much about how a studio looks. And it's not just vanity, it's about flow. I've spent 6 years refining this space for one reason: to remove friction. When I sit down to write, I want the room to disappear. I want an environment that gets out of the way so I can access that deeper creative flow state instantly. The room shouldn't influence the music. It should enable me to get deeper into my own creativity. Before I cut anything else up, I'm going to try to test it out on this panel. Put all of the pieces together, basically build the panel and make sure that I've got everything sized up correctly before I go ahead and cut all the rest of the wood. That way I can make any changes much easier before I commit to anything. I also want to fix up this. I mean, it's worked for the past few years, but it looks pretty bad. So the plan for this will basically sit in the same position but underneath the fabric. And then once those are in place, I'm going to create some brackets for the hooks to hook into. So one of the problems I had with the original design was these little tabs down here. If I flip this upside down, this is literally just screwed in there to basically make sure that the bottom of the panel sits off of the wall. The problem with this one is that because it's MDF, on half of my panels, this happened. So I'm replacing it with something a bit more sturdy. Still very lightweight, but this is actually the side piece that I took off from here. So one of the big things I want to improve with these panels is right here. Because there's no piece of wood in between these two frames, I have this really floppy fabric that just doesn't look very nice. So I'm going to be using these pieces, and basically they will sit underneath the fabric. So I need to screw those in all four corners. So now I can open the fabric, which I've actually been waiting months for. Guildford of Maine. If you've ever stepped into a high-end commercial studio, you've probably seen fabric from Guildford of Maine. They are the legendary brand behind the FR701 fabric, which has been the gold standard in studios since the 1970s. Well, Duvaltex is the company behind the Guildford of Maine brand, and I actually teamed up with them for this video to find the perfect fabric for my home studio. They introduced me to their Clean Impact textiles technology, which got me thinking about something that hadn't even crossed my mind up until this point: the environmental impact of fabrics. This isn't just cloth, it's engineering. It's made from 100% recycled polyester and is actually fully biodegradable when it eventually reaches a landfill. That environmental impact was huge for me. There were 8 different colours, but this opaline colour just fits the vibe I'm looking for perfectly. But of course, the most important spec is the sound. There's a massive difference between fabric and acoustic fabric. Normal fabric reflects high frequencies. Acoustic fabric lets sound pass right through to be absorbed by the insulation inside. My old muslin fabric worked, but let's be honest, it looked really cheap. This new stuff gives me maximum absorption and finally makes the room look like a pro studio, not a DIY project. It has an acoustic transparency of 90% with a very even response across the whole frequency spectrum. Plus, it meets high standards for flame resistance and colour fastness, so it's safe and won't fade. One thing I'm noticing, you can actually see the little bump here from the screws where I screwed in that piece of wood. See when the light's shining up on it. So on the next one, I'm going to maybe drill a little hole so that they sit in further. But other than that, the finish has come out really good. Okay, so this is the third day of working on these things. It's taking way longer than I actually expected. Partly because I'm rebuilding all of the panels and adding a lot of new pieces to them. But then the fabric's taking a lot longer than I expected to get right because I really only have one chance at this. So I'm being really careful to make sure I don't mess this up. So this panel is a little bit different than the other ones. This is the ceiling panel. So it's obviously got a totally different bracket mount, which is just basically these little hooks. They hook onto the railing above. I've got this polyester. I didn't want to leave any kind of chance for those little glass fibers to actually fall through the fabric. So there's a layer of this polyester in between the glass wool and the fabric. The other difference is underneath. This is literally just chicken wire. And all I've done is I've pulled it really tight and screwed it into the frame. So between this layer of polyester and the back, which is covered with fabric, is the same glass wool that's in all of the other panels. I'm going to have to remove some of these screws holding in the chicken wire because they're right in the spot where I want to drill these pieces of wood in. So the biggest issue with this first design is that the side pieces here, I used glue. And as you can see, it did not work very well. You can probably see here, the glue hasn't held up very well. By day 5, I had hit a wall. The base traps were a nightmare. This wasn't just a fabric swap, the original glue had completely failed and the frames were falling apart. I had to rebuild the entire structure of every single base trap before I could even think about adding the new fabric. Each trap took a full day. My hands were raw, the timeline was blown, and I seriously considered just leaving half of them looking ugly. But you don't come this far to quit at the finish line. So I pushed through, and after a whole week of working on these panels and base traps, I was finally setting them up. Before tearing the old panels down, I ran a full acoustic measurement to get a baseline that we could compare to once the new panels are up. I'm expecting that there probably won't be too much of a difference because muslin fabric is incredibly thin. It works really well on acoustic panels. But I made two design choices that might actually hurt the new numbers a little bit. Firstly, the air gap.
The new mounting system makes the panels sit slightly closer to the wall. Less air gap usually means less low-end absorption. This wasn't exactly intentional, it's just that the new mounting system is more stable, whereas the old one was flexing, and because of the flex, the panels were actually hanging slightly further away from the wall. Secondly, the density. The old panels were slightly overstuffed and bulging. I trimmed the excess glass wool off to make sure that the new panels look perfectly flat once the new fabric's on them. Basically, I'm trading a fraction of performance for a massive upgrade in looks. And now it's time to find out if the trade-off was actually worth it. I'll be honest, I was genuinely scared to run this test. On paper, removing that extra insulation and reducing the air gap should have hurt the performance. So let's look at the data. The biggest difference is down here at 30 Hz. It's ringing out more than before. But here's the thing. The panels I modified are standard 4-inch broadband absorbers with a 2-inch gap from the wall. They're designed to control the low, mids and highs from around 500 Hz and up. A 30 Hz wave is literally 38 feet long, which would take 113-inch thick panels to absorb. These panels were never touching it. That rumble we're seeing down at 30 Hz, that's just the physics of this room. The difference is most likely just the mic sitting in a slightly different position for the second test. Now here's the good news. Everything else, the frequencies these panels are actually designed for, is nearly identical. The only thing that stands out to me is there's a bit more energy up above 10 kHz with the new fabric. You can see it clearly in this SPL graph, but that's easy to dial in with thin foam panels. And it actually gives me more control over the damping between 10 and 20 kHz, so that's a win. Same great acoustic performance, but now the studio actually looks and feels like somewhere I want to be. And the lighter fabric, that's the key to my next big upgrade. It gives me a blank canvas for what I'm about to do with the lighting, and I'll show you everything in the next video.